We've been going through our series Untamable, going through the Gospel of Mark, and what we're seeing is that Jesus is an untamable lion of a man. All right, we often think of Jesus sweet, meek, and mild, kind of as a wimp or a pansy sometimes. It's a caricature that we have of Jesus. But we see in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus bursts into people's lives like a whirlwind. And he overturns the tables of their hearts. And he builds something new in their lives. He breaks down what is false. And he builds up truth. He breaks down hate and builds up love. And he breaks down like easy spirituality and traditional religion, and he replaces it with himself. And he gives us a brand new paradigm. Right? Last week we talked about Jesus calming the storm, and we said God allows his people to go through storms in life. He allows them to experience difficult things. But he's right there with them. Right? He entered the storm of our lives so that he could calm the storm raging against all people, the storm of sin and death, the storm of the enemy, Satan. And he could free us from the tumult, from the raging emotions, the raging guilt, and the raging condemnation of our hearts, right? So we could live with him, spotless, faultless before the throne, as we sang in this last song. Today we are in Mark chapter 5. It's on page 765 or 688, depending on which Bible edition you have there. So 765 or 688. We're on Mark chapter 5. We haven't prayed yet this morning. Let's ask the Spirit to do its work here. Father, we thank you that we get a chance on this rainy day to come together and to talk about you and to really hear you, to sit at your feet, to have an encounter with you. And so we ask you, Father, that you would just take the heavy burdens off our shoulders, that you would take all those things that weigh heavy upon our minds away, that guilt, that anxiety of the last week, the anxiety of the week to come. Father, would you just take that all away? And would you just let us see you and hear from you this morning and experience your love and your presence? Now speak to us now through your Spirit. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray these things. Amen. All right. Who here has a problem with patience? Anybody have a problem with patience? See a wife holding a husband's hand up. Right? Yeah, I'm not a patient person. You know, when I get to, I have this tension in me. When I go to the supermarket, I want to find that cashier that I've talked to before, because I want to know them by name, and I want to greet them by name, and I want them to feel special, so that one day they might say, Ted, why do you always talk to me in such a way and ask me about my life and remember it? And I can say, because Jesus cares about you. You know, I look for that. I love people because God loves people. But there's this other aspect of me that when I get to the checkout lane, I'm like, okay, which one's the shortest lane? And I have a slow mind, but in that moment, I'm like super fast. Like all the synapses are firing. And I'm like, okay, that's the shortest line. There's 5 people converging on that spot. If I hop over this cart, I can be right there, and I won't have to wait. Right? That's my knee-jerk, sinful self that always wants to be at work. In traffic the same way. It's like I'm a totally different person in traffic. My sinful nature takes over me completely. And I'm having spiritual warfare and behind the steering wheel of my car. I'm not good with patience. And many of us aren't. We have a hard time not getting what we want when we want it, right? You guys like that? And now I might be exaggerating a little bit with my patience, but my wife's here. She was listening. She'd probably say, yeah, that's you sometimes, Ted. And but what is patience? How do we break down that word? What's the definition of that? Just being calm and understanding, maybe. Yeah, Daryl, were you going to say something? Forgot what you were going to say. Waiting. Yeah, there's an aspect of waiting in patience, right? Yeah, Jan. Not thinking only of yourself. Yeah, that's a hard thing to do when you're not patient. Yeah. Not being always in a hurry. Man, I would love to live that way. That's the way we were meant to live, right? But our Western way of life, we just one place to another, right? Travis? Being persistent, right? Yeah. Yeah, you're not only like waiting, but you are waiting with a purpose. You know what's going to come, and you keep going after it, right? But you don't necessarily have to rush it, right? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. When Jesus calmed the storm, he said, patient. Or he said, not patient. He said, silent, still. Right? Be still. 2 words in the Greek. Right? And the sea calmed down. Right? Man, I'd love to be like that in traffic, like a tranquil sea. Right? Rather than a raging storm within my body saying, come on, And then afterwards, I'm like, okay, well, that could have been me causing that. Or, it's easy not to think about others when you're patient, when you're not patient, right? But patience could be described as love for the long haul, right? Bearing through difficult situations or people, right? Without giving into bitterness or without lashing out, right? And that's often what we do when we're not patient. We either become bitter and we bottle it up, or we lash out at people. Let's look at Mark chapter 5 now. We're going to be on verse 21 today. The heading says, Jesus heals in response to faith. So, right before this, Jesus healed a demon-possessed man. And this was that scary episode in Scripture where there's a man running around naked in the graveyards. He had chains hanging off of him because the townsfolk tried to chain him up, and he just broke the chains with supernatural powers, and he would wail in the middle of the night and take sharp stones and cut himself with them. And, just tormented. And Jesus takes a step on the shore, and the man comes running to him and says, what do you want with us, Son of God? Are you going to take us before our time, or punish us before the allotted time? And Jesus has mercy on him. He casts him into swine, right, into a herd of pigs, and the pigs jump off a cliff and drowned in the Sea of Galilee. And, that's what the evil one always does. It destroys life, right? It hates itself and hates others. And Jesus frees the man from that. And after that, then the man who's been healed goes out and tells everybody, All right? And what's funny is that the townspeople all want Jesus to leave. They're scared. Right? And he also cost them a lot of money because all their pigs are now in the water. Right? But Jesus does that to free a man. It's a very costly thing to free a soul. Right? And it points forward to his cross. Right? And it was very costly to free our souls, the very blood of the Son of God. Right? And then our episode picks up. Jesus gets into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. "My little daughter is dying," he said. "Please come and lay your hand on her and heal her so she can live." So, what is going on in this man's life? What's going on in Jairus' life? Daryl? He's struggling because his daughter's dying. Yeah, do you find anything interesting about his relationship to Jesus right here? This man's a religious leader. He's going to a higher power. Yeah. Yeah, he's humbling himself. Right? How do religious leaders, how have they acted towards Jesus so far? Very standoffish. What? Arrogant, yeah. Hostile, yeah. Yeah, in fact, after our last, not last message, but the time before when he heals on the Sabbath, they plot to kill him. All right, so what does it tell you about this man's situation? He's desperate. Yeah. I wonder if he was one of the guys who was fighting against Jesus and then his kid got sick. And he said, okay, I know what others are telling me. I know what my peers are saying, but I need help. All right? And so this lofty, very influential person in the community, powerful person in the community, is humbling himself before a carpenter. All right? He's bowing before Jesus because his situation is dire. You see, then in verse 24, or actually you saw in verse 23, that his daughter really is as good as dead if Jesus doesn't intervene. All right, it's the final hour. They need to do something. Imagine the excitement and the hope that this man had when Jesus said he was going to go with him. Imagine that. Right? Kind of like showing up at the hospital and they're refusing you and no doctor will take your case and no one can help you, and then suddenly one doctor says, yeah, I'll help you. Like that moment. But imagine the gut-churning urgency of that moment as well. Right? He doesn't know if his daughter has hours or minutes. Right? He wants Jesus to come with him now. Right? So Jesus starts going with Jairus, and then something comes up. Verse 24, it says, Jesus went with him, and all the people followed the crowd, crowding around him. And in verse 25 then, a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years she had spent everything she had to pay them, but she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. Right? So what's causing this woman suffering? How is she suffering? Yeah, Martha. Can you talk a little louder? The rain's kind of stuck. Yeah, that's right. Like in this culture, like if you're a woman and you're bleeding during your menstrual cycle, right, you were considered unclean for that time. Right? You were supposed to limit your contact with others. There were all sorts of laws in the Old Testament time that said, okay, you're clean or you're not clean. Right? You're in a place where you can fully interact with the community, or you're in a place where you should really be isolated. Right? And you think about that, if you've got blood and you don't have great hygiene, it's probably good for you to stay away until you're not bleeding anymore. Right? A lot of those cleanliness laws in the Old Testament, well, at first glance don't make sense. There's a medical reason for it. Right? But here, this woman's been bleeding for 12 years straight. All right? She wasn't even supposed to be in a crowd like this. Right? She was kind of separated from the community. All right? How else is this woman suffering? What's causing her suffering? What? She's broke. Right? She spent all of her money chasing cures. Right? Hasn't found anything. Yeah, Daryl. Doesn't have a good what? She maybe doesn't have a good spiritual life. Yeah, that's a possibility. It's a possibility. We're not quite certain about that. But yeah. Yeah, Martha. She's probably very ill if she's bleeding regularly. Very weak. Right? Do you notice, though, that the disease isn't the only thing causing her suffering? It says that she suffered a great deal from many doctors. Right? And she only got worse. Right? Sometimes, if you look for the wrong cure, it's worse than the disease. Right? House taught us that. Right? You ever watch the show House? The show House is about how the wrong cure can mess you up. I mean, that's not the premise of the show, but the whole show is a group of doctors who are taking on tough cases, and they're constantly saying, okay, it must be this disease, treat them for this disease, and then all of a sudden they're like bloating, or they're turning blue, or they're having a seizure, or having a heart attack, or having a hard time breathing, and like throughout the episode, each episode, this happens like 2 or 3 times until they find the right cure. Right? The wrong cure will jack you up. And how many of us search in life for the wrong cures? Right? How many of us spend our lives trying to cure ourselves, trying to find something to mend the brokenness in our lives? And we look to drugs, we look to alcohol, we look to sex, we look to the approval of family or friends, or the approval of your boss, right? You work to try to get some sense of approval from your boss or your dad or from your peers or something. We're always looking for something to make us whole, and it always leaves us worse off. Right? It might feel better at first, but in the end, it leaves us getting worse. Right? Because nothing can heal us of our disease except God. Nothing can heal the brokenness in our lives except Jesus. Right? And every other cure that we go looking to for the loneliness, for the heartache, for the lack of self-esteem, for the guilt, right, only brings us lower in the hole. Right? Everything that we look to try to secure our own good, our own pleasure, our own future, only lets us down and makes us worse. Let's look on in this story. Verse 27. Okay, so she had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. And immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Now Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, and so he turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my robe? Right? And his disciples are like, who touched your robe? Everyone's touched your robe. We're shoulder to shoulder in here, Jesus. Right? But what's interesting is that Jesus feels the power leave him. Right? And the Greek word for this is dunamis, or dunamai. Right? And it's where we get that word dynamite, or dynamic. Right? It's the first time this word power is used in this way. And what's interesting also is that Jesus feels the power leave him. Right? He knows a healing has happened. For this woman to gain the power of her health, Jesus had to lose power. Right? For her to get strong, he had to get weak. Power left him. And so Jesus kind of starts an inquiry, right? Who touched me? Who's done it? Then 31 through 33, his disciples said, hey, everyone's touching you. 32 says, but he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. So what's interesting is Jesus stops and makes her tell him the truth of what's happened. Makes her explain herself. Makes her talk about her situation. Why are you here? All right? I mean, they don't tell you this, but we know that she suffered many years from bleeding. She was talking about this at this moment, right? How do you think Jairus and the disciples felt? Yeah, Randy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a teaching lesson there, right? This woman's kind of superstitious, all right? And she just wants to get healed and leave. All right? That's the way a lot of people act with church. All right? I want to go so I can feel good about myself, and when I'm good, I don't need to go. All right? Come and get your healing and then leave. And then when you're feeling down and bad and, down on your luck, then come back. All right? That's kind of what she wants to do. It's a superstitious thing. Let me go through the ritual. Let me do my act. And God will heal me, and then I'm out of here. And I don't need to see Jesus anymore. All right? But think about Jairus. How does he feel? What's he waiting for? Yeah, he's waiting for Jesus to come and help his daughter. How would you feel if you were Jairus? You'd be upset, impatient, frustrated, desperate. All right? Anyone else? Angry, jealous. Yeah. Confused. All right? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's this idea of, man, what's he doing? I thought he could heal. He's healing. Okay, come on. Let's get going, Jesus. My daughter's going to die. She's dying right now. Why are you waiting? Right? If Jairus' daughter and this woman were in the hospital, in the emergency room, and if Jesus chose to treat the chronic condition of this woman and not the acute emergency of the little girl, what would we call that? Poor triage. We'd call it malpractice. All right? That Jesus would be in court. He'd be sued. Right? So what's going on here that Jesus heals the chronic condition and sticks around while little girl's dying? Right? Jesus must know something that they don't understand. Right? Jesus must have a greater idea of what's going on in the lives of this woman, Jairus' life, and his daughter's life, and all the people's lives around him that the disciples and Jairus don't understand. Right? Jesus won't be hurried because he knows what's going on. Then a messenger comes from Jairus' house. Verse 35. It says, while he was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, your daughter is dead. There is no use troubling the teacher now. I'd imagine how Jairus feels. All right, the worst day ever kind of thing. All right, the great pain and agonizing, heart-wrenching loss and despair. All right, and then Jesus, verse 35 or 36, overheard them and said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Have faith. All right, a better translation than Jesus overheard this is Jesus ignoring what they said is the better translation. Ignoring that they said that the little girl is dead and that he was no longer needed, turned to them and said, don't be afraid, have faith. In essence, Jesus is saying, trust me. Have patience. There's no need to worry. You see, we talked a little bit earlier, actually, that people have different senses of time, right? And in a Western culture, I mean, we are very time-oriented, right? Service starts at 9. That's when we're going to start our music, all right? Now, if you know us, if you've been with us for a while, that doesn't always happen, but we try to, right? If you were having a service in the other part of the world, somewhere in Asia, right, especially like not Russia, Asia, but in like China or India or even Africa, right, they'd say, hey, we're going to have a service in the morning. And over the course of hours, people will show up. And eventually, they'd start their worship, all right? And people have different senses of time, but no matter what your sense of time is, God's sense of time is different than yours. Right? He works by a different clock. And so Jesus, he's heard that time's run out for this little girl. And he says, don't worry. Trust me. Be patient. There's no need to hurry. And in essence, he's looking over Jairus' head into our eyes. All right? Just as last week, we talked about how during the storm, God's love and grace is compatible with storms in our lives. Now we see that God's love and grace is compatible with our sense of time, with unseemingly unconscionable delays. Right? It's not that God will not be hurried even though he loves us, but God will not be hurried because he loves us. Right? It's not like, oh, well, I love you and I'm sorry, I made a mistake. No, because he loves us, he will not be hurried. Because he loves us, he does not always answer our prayers exactly when we want them answered. Because his timing's better than our timing. His ways are better than our ways. And in the end, he gives us something better than what we wanted before. My friends, you'll feel a struggle to feel God's love if you impose your standards of time upon him. If you expect him to act when you want him to act, you will struggle feeling his love all of your life. But if you trust him and have patience, he will show you his love in a way that's clear, in a way that you cannot explain away. Jesus will not be hurried, and we often feel like Jairus. We often feel like we've been delayed for no good reason. But if we look at this story, this woman got more than she asked for, and so did Jairus. Right? When you go to Jesus, you both give and you get more than you expect. Right? If you look at 37 through 42, it says, "Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. And he went inside and asked, why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead, she is only asleep." And the crowd laughed at him. But he made them all leave. And he took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. And they were overwhelmed and totally amazed. And Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened, and he told them to give her something to eat. Now look at that. Of course, they were totally amazed, right? They came to Jesus wanting healing, but they got a resurrection. Right? They came asking for something that was difficult, and Jesus gave them something that was impossible. Right? You come to Jesus, you get more than you ever asked for, more than you ever expected. But if you come to Jesus, you give more than you expect too. What, right? Jairus thought he would only have to give Jesus enough trust for him to get home and heal his daughter. But Jesus, in essence, says, trust me even after death. Trust me when death is looming over your head. Trust me when death seems to have won. This woman, she came to Jesus as well. As we said earlier, wanted to get her healing and run. Right? She was kind of superstitious, right? Just thinking if she could touch Jesus, do something, she could be healed. And Jesus makes her go public. He makes her explain herself so he could show her it's not her actions that has healed her, but her faith. It was Jesus who healed her through faith, not the superstitious actions of if I do this right, I will be healed. Tim Keller, who we owe much to for this sermon series, says, if you go to Jesus, he may ask of you far more than you originally planned to give, but he can give you infinitely more than you dare to ask or think. Right? And we said earlier, it seemed like malpractice at first when Jesus healed this woman and spent time talking to her when a little girl was dying. But we know the rest of the story. We know that there's a little difference between these situations. Because while one was going to die right at that moment, both were going to die one day. Both were in a place where they would be separated from their Father and Creator forever if Jesus didn't step in and turn their eyes off of themselves and to God and to himself, to the Son. He knew both of these little girls, because of their sin, would die. Both the little girl and the grown girl, right? And Jesus showed both that he has the power over sin and death and its sting. Right? He gives this little girl life at the end of the story, and he gives this grown woman eternal life as he points her eyes to him. Right? It seemed like Jesus delayed for no good reason, but they didn't have all the facts. They didn't know what he was going to do. And, we don't have all the facts either. Right? It often feels like malpractice in our lives when we're going through difficult situations and we say, God, aren't you watching? Why aren't you acting? I notice you're helping others. Why aren't you helping me? The thing is, we're missing some critical information in that moment. And often later on, we see it. Right? I can look back in my life, all the hardship, all the aching, all the crying, all the balled up on the floor, crying out to God for some help. Right? And I can look back through all of that, and I can see God just having his hand on me. And those times I was going to go one way and hurt myself, he closed the door and said, nope, I want you to go this way. And when I went too far the other way, he closed another door and said, no, I want you to go this way. And when I went another way, he did let me experience a lot of pain so that I could go back this way and keep going towards him. And I can see that now. And because I can see that now, and I can see how his hand was on my life in those situations, I trust now that his hand is on my life in any situation. Right? I know that he's good. I know that he's there for me. I know that he's going to work things out in a way that is best for me because I've seen it. Not all the time. Sometimes there's still questions. I'm not sure why I had that happen. I still have the question, why am I still experiencing back pain for the 15th year of chronic pain every day? Right? I thought I learned that lesson. You brought me back to you through it, God. You brought me into ministry through that, God. You've kept me humble through that, God. Didn't I learn my lesson? Is it time to take it away? I don't know why he allows it, but I trust him. I know he's good because I've seen how he's used that for my good and for the good of others that I'm able to witness to now that deal with pain. Right? And so whatever is going on in your life, whatever you're waiting for, Jesus says the same thing. Trust me. Be patient. I'm good. I'm going to take care of you. Well, at the end of this story, Jesus says something kind of peculiar. Right? When he enters into the house of Jairus, he says, the little girl's just sleeping. Right? Now, Jesus isn't naive about the situation. right? He knows what's going on. This girl isn't like mostly dead, like Wesley from The Princess Bride, right? She is dead. She is flatlined, brain dead. She's been so for too many minutes to bring back. But Jesus says she's sleeping. All right, now why this sleep reference? Well, what happens next kind of tells us. When Jesus comes into the room and comes to Jairus' daughter, he says, Talitha, which means little girl. It's a diminutive, which means like it's taking it down to kind of like puppy love language. All right? He's in essence saying, hey, little lady. Hey, baby girl. Hey, sweetheart. And then he says, rise. All right? He's using language that Jairus and his wife probably used when they woke her up in the morning. And he just comes to this little girl. He says, hey, sweetheart, it's time to get up. And he gently takes her by the hand and lifts her out of the grips of death. Right? It's an amazing thing. And it's the thing that I hope each and every one of us hears one day. Maybe not a little girl if you're a guy, right? But it's something that I hope for my daughters, and it's something that I hope for each of you, that you would trust in Jesus all of your days, so that someday when you're laying in the slumber of death, you'll hear the words, hey, little buddy, hey, little girl, it's time to get up. And Jesus will bring us out of death. What's amazing is that Jesus is facing the most ruthless, the most unrelenting enemy of humanity, death itself. And he just says, little girl, get up. And she gets up. It just shows you the awesome power of God. Got to get those tears out of my eyes there. But it's so beautiful that this little girl just rises. And what Jesus is saying here, if I have you by the hand, death is just slumber. If I have you by the hand, death is nothing but sleep. You know, when you're a kid, there's no more comforting place than holding your parents' hand. Even if your dad or your mom were horrible parents, there was something beautiful about holding their hands. Right? And all of us had imperfect parents. But still, that's one of the most comforting places as a kid. Right? And there's nothing more scary for a child than to lose the hand and the sight of their parents. You've all been there, right? You've either lost a child at some point, or you were lost. I remember getting lost in the clothing department of a Myers grocery store and having to find someone, a worker there, and they ended up paging my mom. And I remember just sobbing, running down the aisles, looking for my mom. And somebody stopped me and said, hey, little buddy, what's going on? You know, and it was terrifying. There's nothing more scary than that. But you see in the story of God that Jesus, the Son of God, willingly lets go of his Father's hand for us. He literally humbles himself. He makes himself low in his state of humiliation, we call it. He leaves his Father's kingdom, leaves his Father's side, gives up his right to be God, his power to be God, and makes himself a human being. He lets go of his dad's hand for us. And he continues to lower himself and go farther from his Father so we could be brought closer. And it all culminates right there on the cross as he cries out, Dad, I can't see you. Why have you forsaken me? Where are you, Father? Like a little lost boy crying out for his dad. He was lost so we could be found, right? He was weak so we could have strength, right? He became dead so we could become alive. All right, are you struggling? Are you impatient? Are you angry? Because you don't know why God's been causing you to wait? Know that he's good. Trust him. Look to him. Have patience. And let him take you by the hand. He loves you and he knows what he's doing for you is better than what you think you need right now. Listen to his voice when he says, trust me. And know that soon it will be the day to wake up. Soon he'll lift us by the hand out of not only death, but all the stuff that tastes and feels and hurts like death here and now. Right? It says in Romans 8, chapter I just love, that God uses all things for the good of those who love him. He says that in verse 28 of Romans 8. And then in verse 32, he said, since God did not hold back his only Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him give us all good things? Jesus is with you. Trust him and know that he is working everything for your good and your salvation. And we know that because he showed his love for us on the cross.